You're slowing down progress with unnecessary concerns, my boss said, sliding the termination notice across his desk. We need people who prioritize deadlines. My name is W.D. Connolly. At 51, I've spent 3 decades on construction sites across Billings, Montana. I started as a laborer and worked my way up to site supervisor at Driftline Construction. I know the rhythm of a job site, the sound of a properly running generator, the sight of a level foundation, the feel of correctly tensioned cables. More importantly, I know when something's wrong. For the past 4 months, I'd been overseeing the Riverview Commercial Complex, an 8-story office building set to be the tallest structure in the eastern part of the city. The project was already behind schedule when they brought in Justin Hawkins, a 30-something project manager fresh from some fancy firm in Seattle. On his first day on site, he walked around with a tablet, tapping notes without once putting his hands on any materials or speaking to the crew beyond quick introductions. These temporary supports don't match the specs, I told him last week, pointing to the inadequate bracing on the 3rd floor. We need to reinforce them before we continue upward. The engineering team signed off on the current arrangement, he'd replied, without looking up from his tablet. Moving forward as planned. I documented it like I did with everything: photos, notes, emails. Some might call it covering my ass. I called it doing my job. Now, sitting in the site trailer, I watched Justin wait for an explosion that wasn't coming. Men like him expected men like me to shout, to throw things, to make a scene. When cornered, I simply nodded once and collected my hard hat. "I'll clear out my locker," I said. "I've already had your personal items packed," he replied, sliding a cardboard box toward me. "Security will walk you to your truck." Security. Like I was some kind of threat. Like 30 years of showing up early and leaving late meant nothing. Like raising legitimate safety concerns made me dangerous. I took the box without checking its contents and followed the nervous young security guard to my truck. A few of the crew members noticed what was happening and stopped working. I gave them a small nod, not a goodbye, but of something else. Something that said, "Watch yourselves." As I pulled away from the site, I caught a glimpse of Justin already talking to my replacement. The man he was speaking with was nodding enthusiastically, probably promising to keep things moving at all costs. It wouldn't be the last they'd see of me, though they didn't know it yet. I'd spent my working life building things that lasted my father. He was a carpenter who taught me that shortcuts create weaknesses, and weaknesses eventually fail. Do it right the first time, he'd say, even if nobody but you knows the difference. That philosophy earned me respect from crews and contractors alike. It also cost me opportunities with companies that prize speed over quality. I'd been let go twice before for insisting on proper procedures. Each time, I found another position within weeks. Good superintendents who actually care about code compliance aren't as common as you'd hope. My wife, Elaine, understood my principles, even when they affected our finances. "Your name is on that building as much as the developers," she'd tell me. "You have to sleep at night." Driftline had been different, at least at first. The company's founder, Gregory Stein, built the company on a reputation for quality work. I joined 7 years ago, when they were still mid-sized, handling mostly commercial renovations and small-scale developments. Then Gregory retired. His son took over. The company tripled in size, and suddenly hitting deadlines became more important than doing things properly. The Riverview project was their largest yet, and the pressure from above was intense. The first sign of trouble came when they replaced our original project manager, Hank Willis, a seasoned professional I'd worked with for years, with Justin Hawkins. They're bringing in new blood. Hank had warned me during his last week. These young guys from the big firms, they're all about the bottom line. Be careful, Wade. I'd nodded, not realizing how right he would be. During Justin's first month, small corners were cut. Safety meetings were shortened from 15 minutes to 5. Material inspections became cursory. Documentation requirements were relaxed. When I pushed back, I was labeled old school and resistant to change. I started keeping a separate log of all the deviations from code and best practices, digital photos stored in the cloud, Copies of emails sent from my personal account, voice recordings of conversations where Montana law allowed it. The breaking point came when I discovered they'd substituted lower-grade structural bolts on the 4th and 5th floors, different from what the plans called for. The difference wouldn't be visible to an inspector without close examination, but in an earthquake or severe wind event, it could mean catastrophic failure. "We need to replace these," I told Justin, showing him the comparison. He glanced at the bolts in my palm and said, "The supplier assured me they're within acceptable parameters. We're not delaying the steel team for this." That was 2 days before my termination. I drove straight home after being escorted off the site, the cardboard box, riding shotgun like a silent passenger. Elaine wouldn't be back from her shift at the hospital for hours. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time, staring at the house we bought 15 years ago. It needed a new roof. I'd been planning to do it myself this summer. Now, I had the time, but potentially not the money. Inside, I set the box on the kitchen table and finally looked through its contents. My thermos, a few reference books, the framed photo of Elaine and me at Glacier National Park. My personal tools were missing, a good Milwaukee drill set, quality measuring equipment, and specialized gear I'd accumulated over decades, worth about $2,000. I made a list of everything that was missing, then called the Human Resources Department at Driftline's main office. The woman who answered sounded uncomfortable when I explained the situation. "I'll look into it, Mr. Connolly," she said, "but I should inform you that, according to Mr. Hawkins's report, you were terminated for insubordination and creating a hostile work environment." I hadn't raised my voice once in all my interactions with Justin, not even today. "That's interesting," I replied evenly. "I'd like that in writing, please." "Excuse me. The reasons for my termination. I'd like them in writing. And I'd like my tools returned. Otherwise, we can discuss this through my attorney." She promised to call back. I hung up and stared at my phone for a long moment before opening my personal email. There, in organized folders, was everything I'd documented over the past 4 months. 76 distinct safety violations, ranging from minor to potentially catastrophic. All with photographic evidence. All with records of my attempts to address them through proper channels. It wasn't just about getting fired anymore. It was about the 200 people who would eventually work in that building. It was about the construction crew who didn't know what was being hidden behind drywall and underneath flooring. It was about every corner cut becoming a potentially lethal hazard down the line. I started a new email to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's regional office. The subject line was simple: urgent, multiple critical safety violations at Riverview Commercial Complex. I worked methodically, organizing the violations by category and severity, cross-referencing code requirements, attaching documentation. 4 hours passed. Elaine came home and found me still at the computer. "Wade, what happened?" I told her everything while continuing to type. She stood behind me, her hands resting on my shoulders, reading the screen as I worked. "They're going to fight back," she said quietly. "Let them. You might not get another job in this town." I paused, hands hovering over the keyboard. "Some things matter more than a paycheck." She squeezed my shoulders gently. "I know. That's why I married you." I hit send at 9:47 p.m. Then I started another email to the state building inspector's office. The call from Justin came at 7:30 the next morning. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Wade?" His voice was tight, controlled anger. "Good morning, Justin. I just got a call from OSHA saying they've received a complaint about our site. Was that you?" I sat at the kitchen table, coffee mug in hand. I documented legitimate safety concerns. "That's all. You were fired for causing problems, and now you're proving me right." His voice dropped to something almost like reason. "Look, Wade, I understand you're upset, but this vindictive behavior isn't going to help you find another position. In fact, I'm already getting calls from other firms asking about you. The threat was clear. Keep pushing and I'd be blackballed. If the site is up to code, you've got nothing to worry about." The company, in what constituted an act of intellectual property theft, accused me despite the fact that I hadn't removed anything. All of my documentation had been created on my personal devices and stored in my personal accounts. Still, they were clearly laying the groundwork to discredit me. If that's your position, send me a formal cease and desist, I replied. Otherwise, I have nothing more to say. 3 days later, I received a thick envelope from their law firm. Inside was a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if I continued to malign the company, along with a non-disclosure agreement they claimed I had signed upon hiring. I hadn't signed any such document, but fighting it would require an attorney I couldn't currently afford. They were trying to bury me before the inspectors even arrived at the site. A week after my termination, I was sitting in a downtown diner when Franklin Weber slid into the booth across from me. Frank had been my electrical foreman on the Riverview project, and we'd worked together on and off for 15 years. "This is probably a bad idea," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Probably," I replied, pushing my coffee cup aside. "How are things at the site?" "Crazy. Justin's got everyone working overtime to fix the issues before the OSHA inspection. It's scheduled for next Monday." I nodded. "They're replacing the bolts and reinforcing the supports I flagged?" "Yeah, but here's the thing, Wade." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "It goes deeper than what you saw. They've been falsifying materials documentation for months. Remember those concrete samples that failed the strength test back in February?" He continued. I remembered. The initial pour for the foundation had shown concerning results, but Justin had assured everyone that subsequent tests came back fine. "They never retested," Frank said. "They just changed the paperwork. Same with the fire rating on some of the materials. The manufacturer sent a notice about a batch being below spec, but it was buried." My stomach tightened. "How do you know this?" "Donna, in purchasing. She's been keeping her own records because she was worried about liability. When she heard you got fired, she came to me." He slid a flash drive across the table. Copies of the original documentation versus what was submitted to the inspectors. I stared at the small black device, not reaching for it immediately. "Why are you doing this, Frank? You've got a pension coming in a few years." "My son's firm is going to lease 3 floors in that building when it's done," he said, meeting my eyes steadily. "And I was raised to do what's right, same as you." I picked up the flash drive. "They'll figure out where this came from." "Probably. But I'm old enough not to care much anymore." After Frank left, I walked to the public library and used one of their computers to review the files. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The documentation showed systematic fraud, not just shortcuts and oversights, but deliberate falsification of safety testing and material quality. This wasn't just about Justin Hawkins. It went up to the corporate level, involving purchasing directors and project executives. The Riverview project had been bid too low. To win the contract, they had cut corners, and now they were making up the difference by using substandard materials. On my way home, I drove past the construction site. The building had reached 6 stories, its skeletal frame rising against the Montana sky. I thought about all the people who would work there, unaware of what was hidden in the walls and floors beneath them. When I got home, Elaine was waiting with news of her own. "I ran into Vivian Taylor at the hospital today," she said. Vivian was married to a city council member. She mentioned that Driftline had made some substantial campaign contributions to the mayor and several council members last year, right before they got fast-tracked approval for the Riverview zoning variance. The pieces were falling into place. Political connections, rushed approvals, cut corners, falsified documentation. This wasn't just negligence, it was corruption. I called my contact at OSHA that evening and left a voicemail explaining that I had additional documentation that needed to be reviewed before the inspection. Then I forwarded everything from Frank to both OSHA and the state building inspector's office. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from Gregory Stein, the retired founder of Driftline Construction. "We need to talk, Wade," he said, his voice grave. "This goes deeper than you know." I met Gregory at his lakeside home, 30 miles outside the city. At 72, he still had the weathered hands and straight posture of a man who'd spent decades on construction sites before moving into management. "I never should have let my son take over," he said as we sat on his deck, overlooking the water. Thomas always cared more about growth than quality, but I never thought he'd go this far. You know about the falsified documentation? Gregory nodded. I've been hearing things from old contacts. When your OSHA complaint hit, several people called me. He took a sip of his coffee. What you don't know is that Riverview isn't just another project for Driftline. It's the cornerstone of their bid for the new hospital expansion. That's a $100 million contract. I understood now why they'd reacted so. Gregory responded strongly to my complaint. If OSHA finds serious violations at Riverview, they'll lose any chance at the hospital project. I've been collecting information too, he continued. Thomas doesn't know I still have access to certain company accounts. I've documented irregular payments to city inspectors, altered test results, everything. He fixed me with a steady gaze. I built that company on my reputation. I won't let them destroy it or build death traps with my name attached. We spent 2 hours planning our next steps. Gregory would approach the board of directors with his evidence, forcing internal action. Meanwhile, I would work with OSHA to ensure the inspection was thorough and couldn't be circumvented. The next day, I received a call from a journalist at the Billings Gazette. Somehow, she had heard about the OSHA complaint. I'm working on a story about construction safety oversight, she explained. Your name came up as someone with concerns about the Riverview project. I was careful with my words. I can confirm that I reported safety issues through proper channels. Beyond that, I can't comment on an ongoing investigation. We've heard rumors about falsified safety documentation. Can you confirm that? Someone was probably leaking information, likely from the city offices. I would encourage you to request public records related to the project's approvals and inspections. That's all I can say for now. The article ran 3 days later. It didn't name me directly, but mentioned serious allegations from a former site supervisor regarding structural integrity and documentation practices. By that afternoon, the mayor's office had issued a statement expressing full confidence in the city's building inspection process and promising transparent cooperation with regulatory authorities. The next morning, I got a text from Frank. OSHA here now. Not scheduled. Multiple inspectors. I smiled. The article had accelerated things. 2 hours later, Gregory called. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. I'm presenting everything. How's Thomas taking it? I asked. He doesn't know yet. He's at the site, dealing with the OSHA situation. Everything was coming together faster than we'd anticipated. That evening, a courier delivered an envelope to my house. Inside was a formal offer of employment from Bridgewell Contracting, a respected firm based in Bozeman with a satellite office in Billings. The owner was an old friend of Gregory's, though the letter didn't mention that connection. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Jay, terminated effective immediately. Corporate team on site, taking over project management. I had the Bridgewell Contracting logo now, and my title was Senior Project Manager. The concrete beneath my boots had been poured according to exact specifications, with proper testing and documentation. Every step of the process had been methodical, verified, and done right the first time. The Riverview building had been taken down to its foundation and was being rebuilt by a coalition of local construction firms under intense regulatory scrutiny. Driftline Construction no longer existed. The company had dissolved after criminal indictments and civil lawsuits made it impossible to continue operations. Thomas Stein had taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony against other executives and the city officials who had looked the other way. Gregory had sold his retirement home to help establish a fund for construction workers who had lost jobs in the aftermath. Not everyone had supported my actions. Some in the industry still viewed me as the man who brought down a major company and cost people their livelihoods. Others quietly thanked me for standing up for standards that protected everyone. Frank Waber was my electrical superintendent now. Donna from purchasing had joined Bridgewell, too. We brought over several good people who shared our commitment to doing things properly. Elaine and I had finished putting the new roof on our house ourselves, working evenings and weekends. The physical labor had been therapeutic after months of legal meetings and depositions. Ready for the inspection? My assistant asked, approaching with a clipboard in hand. Always, I replied. I'd learned that doing the right thing rarely came without cost. But I'd also discovered that I could sleep at night, look my wife in the eye, and face myself in the mirror each morning. Some victories are measured not in what you gain, but in what you refuse to lose.